So the main question is, who am I and what is consciousness? And that time, after studying, I think, for 5 years of physics, I came to the conclusion I can't answer this question in a new university. So that time I decided I need to go a very consequent spiritual path of meditation and self-reflection to answer this question. And that time, then some things happened in my life. It's not shall not be an autobiographic lecture here, which made me going to India. And I have lived 12 years as a monk in a very old spiritual tradition from India. And this was for me, a very amazing time with lots of experiences. And but I'm not a monk anymore. I'm not in front of you in a robe as a monk. But after 12 years of being a monk, I started again to return to the society and started to apply what I have learned inside the society. So nowadays, I'm not a monk anymore. I'm married. I have 2 children. And the other things I'm doing, I will talk a little about. But before coming back to this question, what is consciousness and who am I? And related to what you are studying, mainly biology. So yes, coming back to the story, physics. If you understand physics, you might be able to understand chemistry. And if you understand chemistry, you can understand biochemistry. And then you can understand how the body, how the elements and the molecules interacting in the body. And you hope to understand how the body functions. And I think this is a very important aspect of biology. We know now, when we want to understand how life came about, we are talking about amino acids, and that amino acids, they combine to proteins. And but this whole process of combining amino acids to proteins is controlled by the information which we have in the DNA. So this is something which I'm not a biologist, I'm a physicist, but this is what I'm thinking about if I think about the origin of life. That we need to somehow have an idea how this works. And I remember, it must have been 25 years ago, I read a book from Francis Crick. I think you all know about Francis Crick. I think he's a Nobel laureate. And he wrote a book which that time I got very fascinated by. That time I was a monk, and I found this book in the Hugendubel in Munich. I didn't buy it, but I was sitting there the whole day and just reading the book. The book is called, in English, I'm not sure. In German, I think it's called What the Soul, in German language, something like What the Soul Really Is, or The Soul Explained. And then I started to read the first page, and he said, the truth about the soul is that it doesn't exist. Because you do not need such a concept anymore to explain life. He said, before we understood what life really is, that it is based on the DNA and the ability of the DNA to self-reproduce itself and to construct around 30,000 different proteins which we need in the cells in our body. Before we understood this, we didn't know what is life. And before physics discovered what the Big Bang is, we didn't know about the origin of the universe. So before science discovered all the things, Crick argues, we needed metaphysical concepts to understand the world, like soul, like God, like consciousness. But now science has discovered how the universe was created through the Big Bang, through the elementary particle explosion, and how life was created by the process of evolution, first biochemical evolution, and then later by evolution based on the mutation of the information in the DNA and so on. So he said that now we have solved the enigma of life. We know what is the origin of life. He said we know what is the origin of the universe through physics. But then there is one last enigma, one last secret. And this is consciousness. And he said, if we are able to explain what consciousness is, there is no more secret. We basically know everything. And then if we can explain the last secret, the secret of consciousness, or soul, then he says, there is no more need of religion. There is no more need of spirituality. Because we can understand everything through science and the rational mind. And we do not need any irrational ways to understand who we are. And therefore, and he said that's something very good, because religions cause so many problems. It's so irrational, and these concepts are useless. So I read this book, and I was really kind of attracted by the book, but I became also a little angry. I became so angry that I decided I will write my first book as an answer to this one. So my first book, which that time was published, I think 2003, it's called The Last Secret. In Deutsch, Das letzte Geheimnis, Science and Consciousness. Now the new publisher, it was republished, changed the title and the subtitle, so it's called now Science and Consciousness, The Last Enigma, or The Last Secret. And in this book, beginning of 2002, 2003, I wrote it, I discussed this idea of Francis Crick. Because he argues that if we understand all the neuronal processes in the brain, we know what consciousness is. This is his argument. We just have to understand how the brain works, then we know how consciousness works. What do you think about this? Did you think about it?
Probably the last hundreds of years, people asked themselves about consciousness and other stuff related to it. So maybe it's the fastest and easiest way for us to get near that problem by get the information we can get through neural.
Yeah, look at the neuronal networks behind consciousness, and that's right. But I, as a physicist, have a much more fundamental view on this. Because, and here we come back to Niels Bohr, who said, somebody who is not shocked by quantum physics, he doesn't understand it. There especially was one person, I know whom he was referring to when he made this famous statement. He was referring to no one else than Albert Einstein. Because Albert Einstein was very deeply shocked by quantum physics. He was so much shocked that he said, if this quantum jumping doesn't stop once, I regret that I have ever studied physics. And I should have rather become an employee in a casino. This would be much more honorable than being a physicist. This is one famous statement he made. Why? Because he found quantum physics, the discoveries of quantum physics, to destroy his core beliefs. He was deeply shocked. And his whole life, he was kind of trying to prove that quantum physics is not right. And the tragic thing about it is that Albert Einstein, he got his Nobel Prize, not for the theory of relativity, which people might think, but he got the Nobel Prize for his work on explaining the photoelectric effect. It was the first publication about explaining a known effect through the quantum hypothesis. So Albert Einstein and Max Planck you can call them the fathers of quantum physics. So it's kind of tragic. But what shocked Einstein so much that he actually rejected quantum physics? It's a very simple truth. Before quantum physics, the physicists and all the science based on physics believed that there is something called an objective matter. That there is a substance with objective qualities which exists absolutely independently from anyone observing it, anyone interested in it. So absolutely independent of consciousness. So this was the core belief of classical science. I mean classical science based on classical physics, Newtonian physics. The core belief is there exists a substance which is objective. It has an objective nature. It is there even if nobody looks. You can close your eyes and open it again, matter is still there. Maybe your thoughts have changed, maybe your subjective feelings have changed, but matter is independently of this. So this is the core idea of objective science, that there is an objective substance, or whatever it is, something it has to be, call it a substance, or an objective level of reality, which we can call matter. There are even some students at this university, they study material sciences. So this is the core belief of classical physics and science. And one of my main teachers, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, he was a physicist, brother of our former president, but he was also a professor of philosophy. So he actually inspired me to study physics and philosophy as a Nebenfach. And there is one quote from him which inspired me to write another book recently, 3 years ago. And I just want to read this quote to you. I will read it in English and German because it's very essential. Man tries to penetrate the factual truths of nature. But in her last unfathomable reaches, suddenly, as in a mirror, he meets himself. I start the sentence again. Man tries to penetrate the factual truth of nature. This is a story of science. Der Mensch versucht in die sachliche Natur, in die sachliche Wahrheit der Natur einzudringen. So heißt es im deutschen Original. Der Mensch versucht in die sachliche Wahrheit der Natur einzudringen. This is a story of science. Since a few hundred years, we try to understand the objective truth of nature. But when we reach to the bottom, we find a ground which cannot be understood rationally, and it's like a mirror in which we see ourselves. This is an amazing statement. I want to read it to you in German. I cannot remember the exact text, so I opened another German edition of this book. Der Mensch sucht in die sachliche Wahrheit der Natur einzudringen, aber in ihrem letzten unfassbaren Hintergrund sieht er wie in einem Spiegel unvermutet sich selbst. Und das ist schockierend. In the beginning of the last century, atomic physics was discovered. Means the physicists, they looked into the deepest, smallest areas of objective matter. And the idea was to discover the objective laws. But then they discovered quantum physics. And quantum physics has a message to the physicist. It says that this, what you consider to be matter, is just reflecting your own subjectivity. That there is no matter independent of the consciousness which observes it. That there is no physical, concrete reality without the conscious observation. This is a drastic message of quantum physics. That matter depends on consciousness. So on its deepest level, matter becomes subjective. Completely depending on a conscious observer looking at it. Because if no one observes matter, it behaves in a completely different way.
All our consciousness is one, because when we observe a matter, I see the desk and you see the desk, and they both see the same desk. I mean.
Yes, very good question. It's not a question, very good comment. This is very complex because if I observe something, through the observation in the quantum physics, the concrete physical reality manifests. This is called the observer effect in quantum physics. Because before the observation, the physical reality is described by a so-called wave function. And the wave function only describes potential reality in terms of probabilities. So it's a superposition of many possibilities, and each of them has a certain probability. And all these probabilities are contained in one wave function, which is basically a probability function in Hilbert space. So this kind of reality means that all the possibilities, potential realities, are simultaneously present in one mathematical space. For a mathematician, this is wonderful. But if we ask, how does it really look? We have no idea. So now, through the observation, means the contact of the consciousness with this wave function. The wave function collapses. And the collapse of the wave function means that one of these unlimited possibilities becomes real, and all the others disappear within no time. It happens instantaneously through the contact of consciousness with this wave function. Before, there have been hundreds or thousands of possibilities, and after this contact, only one of these possibilities is left. It has a probability 1, and all the others have 0. Before, it was a distribution. So this, just imagine, this is something drastically happening through consciousness. If this observation doesn't take place, the wave function remains in a state of superposition. Means there is no concrete reality. But now the question is, what happens if many observers observe reality? Does everyone, through his observation, create his own reality? Or do we create, collectively, how many people are here? 20? Do we together create one common reality? And then what is with the people outside? Do they participate in our reality, or they create their own reality? And if they create their own physical reality by their observation, what happens if our reality meets their reality? Sometimes our life experience tells us, yes, everyone creates his own reality and they don't fit. They don't match. Especially in relationships sometimes. The closer we come, sometimes the more difficult it is to match the different realities. And I just last weekend on a conference discussed this same question with one of the leading nuclear scientist of Europe. He's a professor at CERN, at the Elementary Particle Accelerator. He's Professor Jan Raak. We had a lecture on the same conference. And there is the key to this question is that within a quantum observation, we are always creating two types of reality. One type of reality is an internal, and the other is external. So whenever a quantum observation happens, simultaneously a new internal and external order is created. And this is the very nature of a quantum observation. Means if I, as a conscious observer, look at the screen, I see, here's Werner Heisenberg, Richard von Weizsäcker, Professor Robert Jahn, Professor Bryan, Professor Tiller. These were all important people on my way. Werner Heisenberg I have not met, Weizsäcker I have met, Professor Jahn I communicated with, Professor Bryan, he visited me, and so on. So I have relationship to all those people. One of my main teachers is Burkhard Heim. He was a student of Heisenberg, also like Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker was. Anyway, so I observe this, and by this, there is a creation of reality. But the first reality is created is the observation itself. And what is the observation itself? It's of the nature of consciousness. It's an information within my consciousness. It's an inner picture which I have of reality. So, and simultaneously, I suppose that there is an external reality which corresponds to this. I don't believe there's just a picture of this screen within myself, but I trust there is a real monitor. But it's two different things. There's a picture within my consciousness, where I see Heisenberg, Weizsäcker, Jahn, Bryan, and so on. But I suppose there's an external reality, and I'm confirmed in this idea. When I ask you, do you also see it? I don't have to. It's a rhetorical question. I think we assure ourselves about the reality of this external physical world through communication. And all of you behave as if you would perceive the same external reality as me, at least right now. You cannot take this for granted. You cannot, but right now it's quite obvious we all perceive the same reality. So, but please try to follow this main point that within a quantum observation, we simultaneously create an internal new order, which is a perception itself. I gather information, I have a new knowledge, and we are creating a new physical reality by collapsing the wave function, by creating the universe as it is here now, and not all the other options, which would have also been possible. And this is a very amazing feature of a quantum process. I'm creating a new internal and external order. So by all of us constantly observing what's going on, we are all creating our own internal images of the world and our own deep inner psychic space consisting of consciousness and subconsciousness. And additionally, we're creating a common reality. So it's a little more complex. And if you write it down mathematically, you will see that in a complex term of the wave functions, you have this individual subjective internal spaces, and they are all in the beginning subjective. And then there is a term which we create by multiplication of all our observations. And this is the common reality which we are creating. It depends on our collective consciousness. But now there is something very important. It's another part of the same story. Another part of the same story. I told you, the physicists in the first 20 years of the 20th century, starting like 1905 with Planck and Einstein, and it went until 1935. in Copenhagen, when Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein in the hospital were almost like quarreling about the philosophical implications of quantum physics, because Einstein just couldn't accept this truth. But ultimately, all the others accepted it. Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, Dirac, Wolfgang Pauli, all Nobel laureates. They accepted this truth, scientific truth, that in its deep ground, matter is subjective. So now I shortly take another way. In the same time, a revolution happened also in psychology. And it also started in 1896. 1896 was a year when Becquerel discovered radioactivity, actually the very starting point of quantum physics. In the same year, 1896, was the first publication, scientific publication of Sigmund Freud about the unconscious aspect of the human psyche. And later, disciples of Sigmund Freud, Viktor Frankl, Carl Gustav Jung, they continue this research in the unconscious. And it was Carl Gustav Jung, a Swiss psychotherapist, who discovered that if you go very deep into the human psyche, if you go very deep, you discover something objective, something which is there within every human being. And he called it the collective unconscious. It's something which is there within everyone in all the cultures, a common ground of potential perceptions, potential ideas, potential terminology which makes up our internal space. I have to make it short because time is short. So in the same time when quantum physicists discovered that matter is in its root deeply subjective, in psychology it was discovered that the psyche in its root is deeply objective. So the most objective thing, matter, becomes subjective at its root, at its core, and the most subjective thing, which is the psyche, our internal space, at its very root, at its core, becomes objective. And when I realized this, it became very clear to me that these two lines of reality are meeting. If you go deeply into matter and simultaneously go deeply into the psyche, you meet at the same point, where objectivity and subjectivity meet, where the split between internal and external reality doesn't exist anymore. And this realization, until now, is the most important realization for me in my personal life, in my scientific understanding, and also in my spiritual understanding of myself. That I, as a human being, having a body or being a body, having consciousness or being consciousness, like being a soul or a psyche, I am not two different types of beings, a material and a spiritual. But this is actually at its core, it's one. But right now, it's split into two different realities. A physical material, where I have to somehow get around and earn some money and live my life. And the internal, psychological soul reality, spirituality, where I find real happiness. And so then I try to somehow combine these two realities. This is what we call life. There is a split within the human being. And the split manifests as a body and a psyche. And this split we see all over the world. And I would say that 99% of all the problems which we see in ecology, in politics, in war, is due to this split within myself within all the human beings. Because we are split, we didn't discover this connection of these two poles within ourselves yet, fully. The same split manifests outside as borders between human beings, as borders between countries and cultures, as borders between religions and beliefs. Like I remember 25 years ago, 30 years ago, life and politics was very simple. There was a West and there was a East. There was a communist part of the world and there was a Western part of the world, and everyone thought the other part is the bad part. Of course, I remember when I was at school and later at university, we didn't believe this black and white story, but there was a lot of political things going on. And, but the world was very nicely split in black and white, or red and whatever. It was split. Nowadays, it's not so easy anymore. We don't know where's the enemy. But this idea for looking for the enemy, the other thing outside, it's due to the split which we have within ourselves. And it's a double split. And for this double split, there was one piece of Kreide, yes. There's a double split within ourselves. So let me draw this picture. This is a space of our experience. The conscious space in which we perceive reality. It's like a screen. And it has two poles. One pole we can call matter. And the other, in German, I have a good word for it, Geist. But does anyone know a German word for Geist? Yeah, okay, I take this one. But it's not the same. Geisteswissenschaften, it's not called the science of spirits, it's the humanity. So it's very difficult to translate the word Geist into English, therefore they use the word Geist internationally. But it means whatever we see, even a ping pong ball has a material and a spirit doesn't fit, but call it a geistigen aspect. And the consciousness, the focus of consciousness, which is the I, das Ich, das Ego, is responsible to create this duality. Without consciousness, the external reality would not split into matter and spirit. And as in the quantum physics I have just explained, matter absolutely depends in its existence of the conscious observer, which is the I in the center. But whenever we are creating a material image of the world, we are also creating an idea of the world. So these two poles are always there. And this field is the field of consciousness. But the consciousness is only one aspect of our psyche. It's the external aspect. And this was a revolution which was caused by the work of Sigmund Freud, Viktor Frankl, Alfred Adler, and especially Carl Gustav Jung, is that 90% of the human psyche is unconscious. So if this is a consciousness, we have a very deep inner space, which you can call the unconscious. And there is a membrane, in terms of biology, there's a membrane in between the conscious and the unconscious or subconscious aspect of psychology. It's a membrane, so you know what is the properties of a membrane, like a cell membrane. It's kind of how it's called, semi-permeable. Yeah? So ideally, things can go through. But this is the ideal case. The normal case is that it is like plastic or any other thing. No, that we keep the things which are unconscious in the unconscious and protect our image of ourselves. This is what we call the ego. from influences of the unconscious. So if you look at this picture, you see two polarities. One is the external polarity of matter and spirit, Materie und Geist. And the other is the vertical polarity of the consciousness and the unconscious aspect of our psyche. And this is kind of a double split which we have as a human being within ourselves. And it's very much related to each other. Especially, this split is very important between the conscious and the unconscious. Consciousness is whatever we actually know about ourselves and the world. We can call it actual information. Actual information. Actual information has one property, it's called Eindeutigkeit in English. No, German. Eindeutigkeit, I don't know the English word for it. Like in informatics or computer science, we can only deal with actual information. The bits have to be either 1 or 0. There cannot be something in between. There cannot be 1 and 0 simultaneously. It has to be eindeutig. What is the English? Whatever it is, eindeutig. This is actually the most important feature of consciousness, Eindeutigkeit. Under this membrane, everything within the unconscious is not actual information, but it's potential information. Potential information. So potential information is a superposition, like one bit in a series of information. One bit has to be either 0 or 1 in Eindeutigkeit, in consciousness. But on the level of the unconscious, or potential information, if we look, for example, we look at this one, it's a superposition of a 0 plus a 1, and each of them might have a certain probability. Like this is a quantum state, which is the superposition of the possibilities. So here you already see that the potential information can be related to the wave function in quantum physics. And the actual information is a physical reality which is generated through the observation. So here we have the potential reality, and here we have the actual reality. The actual reality is on the level of the consciousness, and the potential reality is on the level of the unconscious. So quantum physics created this duality of a potential reality and an actual reality, a conscious and an unconscious reality. And here I see the parallel development of quantum physics from 1900 to 1935 and psychology from 1900 to 1935. It was the same time that quantum physics discovered this and psychology discovered the same things. But normally, psychologists and quantum physicists, they don't discuss these things together, because physicists normally don't discuss their science with psychologists, and psychologists don't discuss their science with physicists. This is very rare. But it happened, still happened, because one of these physicists who got a Nobel Prize for this, his name was Wolfgang Pauli. The same time when he developed the theory for which he got the Nobel Prize, the so-called Pauli principle, he developed a neurosis. And because of this neurosis, he went to a psychologist. And this psychologist happened to be Carl Gustav Jung in Zurich, where Pauli was a professor. So from that time, a 20-year lasting dialogue between one of the greatest physicists who ever lived with one of the greatest psychologists who ever lived. By providence, they came together. And for 20 years, they were discussing, they were struggling for a common language of physics and psychology. And this is an amazing dialogue. And I think it's so important for humanity to look at this dialogue, because these were two giants, two genies, who came to the conclusion that we have to overcome the splits of external and internal reality, of matter and spirit, of the conscious and the unconscious. Because it's it's complex. It's complex. But I come back to this one point so that you can see the connection. To create actual reality from potential reality, from the wave function, a concrete reality of atoms, elementary particles. It happens through a so-called quantum observation. It's a quantum effect. So the quantum effect is happening exactly at this point. It's happening through quantum processes within our body. And here we are back into biology. It happens through quantum processes within our body that the conscious aspect of our personality, our conscious mind, communicates with the unconscious reality within ourselves. And simultaneously integrating matter and spirit as an external image of the world. And therefore, I spent the last 15 years of my professional life. I mean, I started my professional life 15 years ago after being a monk. But I concentrated on looking at this point. It became the focus of my interest. To look at the importance of quantum processes within the human body and how the quantum processes in the human body connect my consciousness with my body. Because somewhere consciousness and body have to talk with each other. Because if in my consciousness I decide I throw this ping pong ball to some of you, oh, I'm sorry, I do it. But before there is a conscious decision, and then it happens in the external world. You cannot imagine what one can do with ping pong balls. Try to catch it. Good. I train. Yeah, you're good. Give it back to me, please. But not all at once is difficult. I'm just in the process of learning to work with 2 and 3 simultaneously. It's not like jonglering, but it's a matter of training the consciousness-matter duality. And it's very good to get some people wake up in a lecture also. But yes, looking at the importance of quantum processes in the body. The first practical work I did with this was already around 1995 when I met the German biophysicist Professor Fritz Albert Popp. He is a professor of biophysics who introduced the term biophotons. You might have. Did you look at biophotons? Did you look at photons? Yeah, photons is clear. It's something from physics. This, if you consider light to be particles, then you call them photons. But of course, light is particles and waves simultaneously. This is what Dirac discovered, particles and waves. 2 ways to look at the same thing. And Niels Bohr explained it in its principle of complementarity. But Fritz Popp concentrated on those photons which are created in the DNA. He considered the DNA to be a Hohlraumlaser now the technicians have to help me. A hollow space laser? No, I think that. Huh? Cavity laser, yeah. Because there's a cavity within the spiral of the DNA. And within this cavity, very weak electromagnetic quantum fields are generated. And this ultra weak electromagnetic fields within the DNA from time to time emits a photon. And these photons contain amazing amount of information from the DNA. And the DNA communicates through photons with other DNAs, with other parts of the cell or with other cells. This is a hypothesis. And Professor Popp tried to prove, I think he was successful, that this light, this ultra-weak cell radiation, as he called it, is coherent. It's coherent light. It's actually laser light. And he asked the question, after proving that it is coherent, why does nature bother to create laser light? It's not so easy. It must have a purpose. And the purpose is communication. So his idea, and I think nowadays it's a very well-established science, the science of biophotonics, is that within the human body, there is an extremely weak electromagnetic field, which is so weak that its energy content is not important. But it's all about information. It's all about communication. And it's a quantum field. It's a coherent quantum field, which organizes the information exchange among our cells. And even information exchange of organisms. And also, because it's a quantum field of very low intensity within our body, it has the ability to connect our body to the consciousness, because it's a quantum process which connects matter, spirit, the consciousness, and the unconscious. So therefore, I was, since more than 20 years, interested in this biophotonic field within the body as a link between matter and spirit and consciousness and the unconscious. And I believe it's of extreme importance to understand this quantum properties within biology. If you look at the body as just a physical system ruled by classical physics and chemistry, you will never understand life. Life as a holistic process of matter, spirit, consciousness, and the unconscious needs a very deep understanding of the nature of quantum processes. Not only technically, that you know how to calculate with quantum physics, Schrödinger equation, Hilbert space, and all these things, quantum chemistry, but you need to understand the philosophical implications of quantum physics. And this I really owe to Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, who wrote extremely important books on the philosophy of quantum physics. And to another of my teachers, Burkhard Heim, who was a disciple of Weizsäcker. He did his master's in chemistry in Göttingen, von Weizsäcker and Heisenberg, who on the basis of these ideas and Albert Einstein's ideas, therefore Einstein is here, developed a model of reality. And tell me what's the time, please. Oh, okay, it's 6 o'clock. I slowly come to an end, but I want to show this to you. It's a long presentation. Einstein, Burkhard Heim. He was an amazing person and amazing physicist. He developed a model, a physical mathematical model of reality, based on gravitation theory, based on Einstein's gravitation theory, which you all know has 4 dimensions, 4-dimensional space-time. And 4-dimensional space-time was already a revolutionary concept. But Bokka-Time proved mathematically that if you take gravitation theories, you cannot do it in 4 dimensions. You need 6 dimensions to create a gravitational theory which is free of contradictions. So he expanded 4-dimensional space to a 6-dimensional space, and he ended up with these 2 extra dimensions. Other people use a laser pointer, but this also works. This 5th and 6th dimension they are not really material, but they are an energetic type of space. And then later he discovered that there is if this 6-dimensional structure, you can expand to 12 dimensions, and you get a symmetric structure of, let me try, matter and spirit. So these 2 parts of reality, matter and spirit, it's 2 times 4 dimensions. But again, we have the same problem. Matter, spirit don't talk to each other. They need a translator. And this translator is in between. It's 4 dimensions in between, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th dimension. And this is what I call the information field. The nature of these 4 dimensions is information. So matter and consciousness, matter and spirit, talk to each other through information. Because information is a link. It's not Geist, it's not matter, it's something new. And with this model, I'm working since practically since 5 years, and on the basis of this, I have developed a technology how to understand the interaction of matter and consciousness within medicine. So the main applications which I derive from this is, it's devices who can analyze the information field, and in this way understand how matter and spirit, Geist, consciousness are interacting, or where are the disturbances of interactions. And when these 2 aspects of reality, materia and Geist, don't communicate with each other, in medicine we call it there's a disease. So all diseases, in a psychosomatic sense, psycho is up, soma is down, can be detected by disturbances in the information field. And how do I do it? We do it by the analysis of quantum processes. Like in this small box, there's a very sophisticated quantum process inside. It's a quantum process of light. It's creating 4 million photons in a second, and their behavior within a quantum process is analyzed. One needs to connect it with a USB cable to the computer. And then with this is kind of an interface into the information field. And with this interface, we can scan or analyze the information field of a body, of a human being, which contains all the information how his body and his Geist are interacting with each other. So it's a basis of a new kind of medicine, which I call information field medicine. And this information field medicine has a lot in common with traditions of healing, for example, like tomorrow, day after tomorrow, I fly to Shanghai, and at the weekend I'm a speaker at the biggest annual conference of traditional Chinese medicine. And I'm a keynote speaker on a conference of traditional Chinese medicine with 500 doctors. I have no idea about traditional Chinese medicine. That's a little unique thing about it. But they invited me because they understood that what I have discovered, the importance of information fields in medicine, it comes to exactly the same conclusion as the traditional Chinese understanding of the body. And you might have heard about the concept of TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, like the concept of qi. Qi everyone has dealt with. You know, Tai Chi is a certain form of movement where you move the body, but in your consciousness, you experience the energy moving. And the energy, the qi, is a very old, 2,500-year-old Chinese expression of a so-called subtle energy, which is an experience. It's an experienced reality when you overcome the split of body and mind. Because, as I said, the main problem of humanity is a split. And in the traditional Chinese concept of health or human wholeness, they have the ideal of mind and body uniting to one united energy, and they call it qi. And to re-experience one's own connection to the qi, to the flow of energy, which is connecting yourself, making one, but also connecting you to the world. Because you can feel the split in yourself, then you're not happy. But you can also experience a split between you and others, then you're also not happy. So the qi is the answer of the ancient Chinese wisdom. The qi is the answer, that you have to feel this energy within yourself. You become aware within yourself of this deeper reality, and then like this connect to the outer realities through the same energy of qi. And there are many concepts, like the concept of the Tao. The Tao is, I think all of you know the symbol of traditional Chinese medicine, or the Tao. You know, everyone knows it. It's a symbol of uniting the opposites. Opposites I talked about, matter and spirit. As a monk, I learned matter is bad, spirit is good. Now I know it's what to say? Einseitigkeit. This is a Einseitigkeit. I don't know the English expression. The other, split, conscious, unconscious. This is the yin, the black, and this is the yang, the white. But there is yang within the yin, and there is yin within the yang. And it's one wholeness. So the whole basis of the traditional Chinese culture is bringing the opposites together. The whole basis of the Western culture and science is an important aspect of it. It's separating the opposites, concentrating on one in the consciousness, and making the other unconscious. This is the basis of Western civilization. It's split. It's a split of the black and white, concentrating on the external and making the internal to such a degree unconscious that it will haunt us. In Deutsch sagt man, dass man davon besessen ist. And the being hunted by the unconscious aspect of reality results in something extremely dangerous, and this is called religious fanaticism. And it's a major problem, as you all know. It has been a major problem in Europe because our whole European culture for 1,300 years was based on religious fanaticism. Before the Age of Enlightenment, the Dark Middle Age, where there was one religious doctrine. And the same we have nowadays as a major problem. So I think what I'm talking about, the split, it's not just some nice philosophy, but I'm very convinced that it's the root problem of what humanity has nowadays. And coming back to the title of this lecture, the Eastern Wisdom, I think the Eastern cultures, and I can say my original contact with the Eastern cultures was India, where I have been as a monk, where I was initiated in a very old spiritual tradition. And I went to India at least 20 times, doing different pilgrimages. But in the last 3-4 years, I got very interested in China, And because I see this old Indian and old Chinese culture, they're very different, but they have something very deeply in common. And this is this symbol. It's a unification of the opposites and the integration of the opposites within ourselves. And this, I think, it's very, for me, it's personally, it's the most important lesson in my life, which I had to learn even by becoming a monk and by focusing exclusively on my spiritual life, was again just focusing on one side. Other people focusing exclusively on the material also is not balanced. So the integration of both aspects is the key, at least for my personal way, in my personal work. All right, I think enough time which I have taken for myself, maybe we can start a small discussion on this basis. So first, at least, thank you for listening. Thank you. I'm aware that I went in a short time through many concepts, which are very familiar for me, and maybe new for you, but maybe you have some ideas or some questions to this sort.
In my experience, actually, a human being, how can a human being can take more space in unconsciousness which practices? Like, I is having some consciousness that is actual, and another is unconsciousness. How can I go to more unconsciousness? How can I know more unconsciousness?
Yes. I understand your question. The question, I repeat it for these listeners. The question is, how can I, correct me if I'm wrong with your question, how can I understand or experience more about this unconscious aspect of my own personality? You know, I say this is more than 90%. If this is true, it would be interesting to look inside. So what are the ways to do this? Yes, there are many practical ways to do it. And some of them are very close to us. I want to start with something extremely simple. It's called dreams. It's a function of dreams. The function of dreams is a communication from the unconscious into the consciousness. So whenever we wake up, we know we have dreamt. There is no night when we don't dream. But normally we don't remember, and even if we remember, immediately when we open our eyes, photons hitting and the signals going to the brain, and the epiphysis is stopping to produce melatonin, and we forget everything. So, but if you start to be interested in what the unconscious wants to communicate through the dreams to the ego, everything changes. Because it's all a question of attention. If you don't pay attention to a child, you have a problem. If you start to pay attention, try to understand it, relationship changes. The same with the unconscious. The unconscious is little like a child. It communicates, but in its own language. And dreams contain lots of compensating information in a language which normally the consciousness doesn't understand. So it's kind of a science, but it's a natural science which everyone can learn. And I think this is one of the major changes which my wife, I'm married since 16 years, and one of the major changes she experienced, saw in me, is that I started to become interested in dreams. Before, like maybe 15 years ago, when she told me something about her dreams, I couldn't pay attention because I thought dreams are really dreams. I'm too much a scientist, you know. And even as a monk, I was not interested because I thought consciousness is everything. So the dreams, each dream contains important message. But the language of the dreams is a symbolic language. So it's important to understand symbolic language. And if you dream, let's say you dream about someone else. Like many times we dream about some person we know, some maybe professor in university, or our girlfriend, or our boyfriend, or whatever we dream about. The first thing you have to understand, whoever appears in your dream is representing an aspect of your own unconscious. It's not the guy outside. You know, somebody hit you in the dream. You can be sure there is something within you represented by this person which wants your attention. Otherwise, why would he or she hit you? So the first mistake we do in interpreting our dreams is think, oh, we dream about something else. No. Dream is purely a communication between, you can say, through the Iron Curtain. You know, like in the time of the Iron Curtain, the governments were somehow communicating through some strange ways. So this is dreams. But it's not strange. We have to just understand the language. So this is very simple. And if you start to pay attention, then you learn the language and you start to establish a friendly relationship. Because unfortunately for most people, the relationship is not a friendly relationship. And therefore, because it's not a friendly relationship, here's the ego, which normally thinks I'm so great. And whatever doesn't fit in this idea of I am so great, it turns within the unconscious into what Jung called the shadow. And it's such a big conflict. And because the shadow is the last thing you would accept to have anything to do with yourself, you have only one chance to deal with it psychologically, and this is what we do all the day, is because it's there, you project it to outside. This is the first law of deep psychology. It's called the law of projection. Whatever belongs to you and you are not conscious about it, you project it in someone else, in something which you don't like, something which threatens you. For example, it's extremely nice if you're white, you will project it in someone who is black or has any other color of skin. If you're a man, you project it into women. If you're a woman, you project it into men. And this is how the whole drama in this world starts and ends. It starts and ends with this, and it's so simple. And there's only a simple solution. You know, we don't need this wall, and all the walls in the world, and all the ideas of building walls between countries, nations, religions, it's only because of this protecting from your own self. And it doesn't make sense. It makes a lot of sense. It's the basis of this world. In India, we call it Maya. This is really Maya. This is illusion. Not the world is illusion, but the split is illusion, and it creates a projection, and then here we have the interaction. And it appears in our dreams. So the dreams is the first way to communicate. But then they're very drastic. Also, there's collective dreams. Each civilization has collective dreams. Like, for example, in our culture, there are many things which are conscious, but other things, each culture has its own shadow. And the unconscious things are told in the mythology. They are told in the fairy tales. They are told even in the religious stories. Like in India, if you look at the Puranas and all the old stories about Ram and about, you know, the avatars, and there's a lot of mythology. This is like a collective dream. This is all the information about the deep unconscious of the Indian society is there. You can look at it. Of course, it changes. We have mythology here also in our part of the world. Like one of the mythos the most strongest mythology in my life has always been the Grail's mythology. Like, you know, the Holy Grail. And in my new book, I have a whole chapter about the Grail, about Parzival, about Merlin. It's all a part of the of the European collective dream. So this is very interesting to look at the mythology of a culture, to understand, you know, its unconscious things. But then there are very drastic methods to access the unconscious. One drastic method, for example, you might have heard about it. It's called holotropic breathing. Holotropic breathing was developed by a Czech psychotherapist who had been working for 20 years for the government in the research of LSD. Because LSD is opening up the unconscious, but it's a little extreme drastic, and not everyone can deal with it. And also it's illegal, so he had to stop working with LSD, and he was looking for a way to open up the unconscious without drugs. And he discovered that just by breathing, within 5 minutes, you can have the same effect. But it's not very much known because it's not without, it's not something you should just lie down and do. But it's really, it needs a safe space. So he developed it into a form of psychotherapy. It's called holotropic breathing, because if you, through the breath, you can enter into the unconscious. The yogis know it in India. They practice pranayama. Pranayama is you intensify the breathing, you make the breathing deeper, and you make the breathing quicker, that's all. And you listen good music to it. This is what the yogis don't do, but the shamans do it. Music, rhythmic music, like 4 hertz, like even in techno music you have this. So rhythmic music, breathing, dancing, all things get you into ecstatic trance. And in this altered state of consciousness, you are actually accessing the unconscious. But then if you don't have a frame which will help you to integrate it, you might not, or you will probably not benefit from it. Like some people who might just do it with the help of drugs and other things. They get so much content, it just makes them crazy. Because there is a good reason why the ego is protected from this. There is a reason for the wall. Because cannot handle it. So normally we need help to handle it. And therefore, it's an interesting anthropological research. I have read, it's a thesis about, the result was that 90% of all the human cultures on this planet had a ritualistic way to bring people into the unconscious through rituals, either through music or through dancing or through initiation rituals. Like a boy, if his father would see, or the boy is growing up, now he needs to become a member of the, adult society. He would go through a ritual of initiation, which is not like we have nowadays confirmation or communion in the church where actually nothing happened. I mean, I remember I got confirmation, but I didn't experience any transformation. The idea of this most important points in life, like change after puberty, within puberty, change to the being accepted in the adult society, it's different for women than for men. But for both, there are ritualistic ways to do this kind of phase shifts in one's life. But our culture lost these things. It's not there anymore, and therefore people feel quite lost. So like in a yoga, you have techniques to access the unconscious, but the yoga tradition has a different focus. it's not so much focused on the content of the unconscious. But this is a more complicated. But through pranayama, you can access also. And then there are different ways in the therapeutic scene, like psychoanalysis through different ways is there for accessing the unconscious. But my my experience within the last years is that at a certain point, life itself becomes a deep communication between your conscious self and your unconscious self. And it naturally happens around the middle of the life. So most of them are still a little younger than me. I think all of you. So you're all in the first half of your life, which is mainly a life within the conscious space. But even being in this part of one's life, it's good to know that there will be a second part where everything what you have created in your consciousness, all the rules, all the achievements, your self-confidence will be questioned again, and you need to negotiate with the other part, which you actually have. You have neglected, you have to neglect it. Because to become something within the society, you have to become very specific and self-confident at this point. Otherwise, you're lost. And it's only very few people who can, from the very beginning of their life, manage integrated personality. So it's in the first part of life, it's good. It's absolutely okay to be extreme on the one side, but around, I would say, 35 to 45 comes a time when integration starts, and people avoid it, especially in this society. They don't want to. They really want to avoid it. So then at one point, like 50, it becomes harder and harder to avoid. And if you continue, at one point you might have a heart attack or something else. And you might even have a near-death experience. And this is a very drastic experience to confront the other side within yourself. And it's not happening very rarely. The near-death experience is confrontation. Yeah, near-death experience means an experience and confrontation with death. And death is the ultimate confrontation with the unconscious, isn't it? So if you experience it before actually dying, it's an amazing insight about the insight in the wholeness of your personality. And I have talked to many people who had a near-death experience. And I was recently a speaker on a conference where a cardiologist from Holland was speaking. And he did a prospective clinical study on near-death experience. His name is Dr. Pim van Lommel. And he is a cardiologist who's doing an operation on the open heart. He had 600 patients on his operation table who were clinical death. Heart stopped beating, and the brain death was there. Brain was flat rate. And then he got them back to life. And directly after waking up, he interviewed them. And he had all the medical parameters. It was published in The Lancet, which is it's like the most distinguished magazine for medical publications. It's very prestigious work. 20% of all people who have a heart attack later remember a very conscious near-death experience. And then what he did, and this is the most amazing thing about his study, is he followed these people through 12 years in their life. He wanted to know what happens in the 12 years after a near-death experience. And all of these people drastically changed their life. Most of them changed the job. Many of them changed their partner because they didn't want to live with a compromise anymore. And normally life is a compromise. But all of them became more courageous, and all of them understood one thing. And therefore, the book he wrote about it, it's called Unlimited Consciousness. That life and consciousness is unlimited, and we limit ourselves so much within our ego that it hurts. And they didn't want to live with this walls around themselves anymore. So to have a near-death experience is an extremely good method to do the research into your unconscious, but it's very difficult to control it. Therefore, I don't recommend. I started recently to do parachuting, jumping from airplanes, but not with a reason to have near-death experience. But my experience is jumping from an airplane 4,000 meters high with a parachute also confronts you very strongly with everything within your unconscious. So everyone has to find his own way. There is not one way, but the very fact is that you open yourself to this part of your own personality already changes, because you start to pay attention. And it's even, you know, small fantasies, because it's not only that we are dreaming in the night, but the dreams are there all the time. Even now I'm talking here, I am dreaming. My brain is creating, my unconscious is creating constantly stories, images, symbols. But now, everything else is too loud. I can't hear it. There's too much light, so I cannot see it. If I turn off everything else, like in the night, I turn off the light, I turn off all the other sorts, and the ego shortly gets out of control, then these fantasies become real and they get a substance. But even now, in all of your minds, there's constantly dreams going on. And sometimes these dreams become amplified by things happening outside. And I see it many times. I can recognize something is going on within myself. I see it outside. Even sometimes in a movie. And I get messages. And it can become very extreme. You might even hear voices or see things which are not there. The psychologist will say you do some treatment or take some pills, but that's not the idea. It's to pay attention to one's fantasies and to the messages which are coming always from outside, but they are actually the messages from inside. For example, I give you a very small and very small example. I have a cross trainer in my sleeping room, and I never liked to use it. So I always had to watch some movie to use it. Otherwise, I would not convince myself. I'm not using it anymore. Nowadays, I do every day one hour training outside. But before, I was doing this, and so I watched some kind of a stupid 45 minutes. Whatever it was. And there was one special agent who told to some other special agent, "You have such a beautiful house." And in this moment, I just had the idea, somebody told it to me, "You have such a nice house, or home, you have such a nice home." Because it was a time where I thought, do I really live in the right place? Is this really my home? Do I have to look for another house? And suddenly I saw, oh, there's a message directly to me. Came to this stupid film, you know. But in a way, I could say, as a spiritual person, I can say, this was a communication from God. You know, some people then say, okay, God talked to me. Other people then would say it in a different way. It's a message from the unconscious or from the self. So it's this area is very. I gave a very small example, but it's all about becoming more attentive to one's fantasies and to messages which are always there. There's a book from what's his name? It's really a bestseller. It's called Gespräche mit Gott. Somebody of you knows it? It's someone who, it's a story of one American businessman who lost everything due to some bad luck in life. And he lived 3 years as a Obdachloser, collecting aluminium bottles to live from the fund. You know, and he was so frustrated with life, and he wasn't really a religious man, but at one point, sitting down somewhere, he said, he really accused God. You know, if you're really down, even as a non-religious person, at one point you have to accuse someone for your misery. So he really accused God and said, if you exist, and I mean, you made my life such a failure. And anyway, he was desperate, and then he fell asleep. It's a true story. So at one point he woke up and he heard a voice, someone talking to him. You know, and told him, write it down. And he took a pen and started to write and write and write. And after 4 nights, he had such a book. It's published. It's called Gespräche mit Gott, Conversation with God. And the main message is that God is talking every single moment to us. Our whole life is just a conversation with God. This is a religious language. In a psychological language, is the self, the deep root of our personality, the deep root of everything, is always communicating through the consciousness. You know, but we don't hear. And if we don't hear and don't want to hear and make a big wall here, at one point, the communication will take drastic terms, like a real voice talking to you. It's very drastic. Or sometimes the communication is in a different way. For example, this is what I'm dealing with professional, through a disease. It's a symptom of the body. And it's nothing else than the unconscious self talking to the ego, something which it didn't want to understand whole life. But then, if the body has a symptom, suddenly you can pay attention. But then you go to the doctor and ask for an operation or for some pills, but this will not help. So the work we are doing with information field medicine is to understand the language. You know, what is the idea behind the communication? So I think you asked a good question, and I just give a little spectrum of answers. But I think that, huh? It's?
Your heart and the mind.
Ah, okay. Many people say the heart is the seat of the mind. That the heart is the seat of the consciousness. If you look at the human being, here's one. So on the left is matter, on the right is spirit. The head is the ego. And the deep self is under. So it's a cross, isn't it? It looks like a cross. We look like a cross. Therefore, the cross is an extreme strong symbol. Some religions take the cross as a symbol. But it actually exemplifies the situation of the human being. Here's matter, left side, here's spirit. It's the female and the male aspect of reality. Then here's the ego, the consciousness, and down is the deep self. And we are kind of crucified between these 4 poles, and the heart is in the middle. Therefore, in India, you have the structure of the 7 chakras. And the 4th chakra is the heart chakra. It's in the center. So therefore, the heart, it's a very, very sensitive place. You know, like if emotions, the unconscious, all these aspects of our psyche affect the heart very strongly. So we have also developed one system, it's called TimeWaver Cardio. One of the systems I have developed is analyzing the frequencies in the heartbeat to understand the emotion, to understand unconscious influence on the consciousness. Within the heartbeat, you can make a fast Fourier transformation of the frequencies of the heartbeat. You find peaks, certain frequencies, and all these frequencies have meanings. But more important than the frequency distribution is, you see, if the heartbeat is coherent or chaotic. If it is coherent, it indicates an integration of the personality. And integration of the personality strongly manifests in the heart area, because the heart has its own hormonal system. And the lower glands and the upper glands, which have their own hormonal systems, they influence the hormonal system of the heart. So within the heartbeat, you find all the influences of the sympathicus, of the parasympathicus, of the pineal gland, of the epiphysis, it's the same, hypophysis, of the adrenal gland, and of the sexual glands. So all these glands and different aspects of the autonomous nervous system, they combine in the heart area. Therefore, we as a human being have always a strong, connection to our heart, emotional, the mind. It's all, it's the center of our personality. It's a heart.
In this diagram, it's very interesting that if suppose means you say the unconsciousness have the potential information.
Yes.
And this one is like my personality, how I grown up. Means if I will suppose like it saved everything and my feelings and my acts, and I will do like the same thing. Let's suppose if I grown up like do the charity and
yes.
very good things, and when I will do this, I will say to the matter, do this, means that do the charity and this, and then I will at the same time send the feelings to the spirit that feel relaxed, good and this. I suppose at the same time, if I grown up like ISIS like, and I grown up there and the information is like here, when you will kill who didn't match your ideology, then you will send the information to the matter, just kill, and send the information to the spirit, just feel relaxed. So it's, but the both thing is just, so then it's
even, yes, it's very difficult to comment now, but yes, we have in all the cultures, we have ways to, you talked about charity. This is external ways to it's very interesting to look, like if people do charity work, if they try to do something good or something pious outside, especially in India you see this a lot, it's something very good, but many times it's a compensation for subconscious contents. And to see where do you engage in the external world to help others, to do good for people. It tells a lot about your deep personality. So it's something very good that you do it outside, but normally it's a compensation for some work which you didn't do inside. So if it goes parallel, then it's perfect.
so because mostly you said the unconsciousness is dreaming.
No, it's the dreaming is one way of communication between here. Like if a dream comes up, it's a piece, small piece from the unconscious showing up in the consciousness. So now if the consciousness pays attention to it, this gets energy, because whatever the consciousness pays attention to gets energy. And it kind of activates the unconscious. Because the unconscious, there's a nice picture. This is water, and here's air. So we are swimming above. But there are certain unconscious energies. They are like balls full of air. So naturally, they would come up. but we are using a force to keep them under. So there are a lot of psychological energies in the unconscious which want to come up. They have lots of energy, but they are not compatible with the ego. And therefore, we are using constantly extremely a lot of energy to keep them down. So practically, we're losing half of our life energy, of our prana or our chi or our libido or however we can call it, to keep down these extremely strong energies. And then they turn negative. They kind of turn against us, and we re-experience them as opposition from outside. This is what we call karma in India. Karma, this is a concept from Indian philosophy, is basically whatever you didn't integrate inside, whatever you didn't engage inside, it appears outside as destiny. So it's not a good strategy to use half of one's energy to keep down such a great energy potential which we actually have under the water. So to use this potential information, it's a great asset. And therefore, mainly in my practical work, I concentrate on, oh yeah, this is another way. This technology which I have developed, it's called TimeWaver. If you're interested, you can look it up. Probably in the internet you will find something about it. It's communicating through the potential information of the unconscious through the quantum processes. And we have developed medical devices so that a doctor, if he has a patient, he can understand what's going on in his unconscious, why he has certain diseases. This is the idea, to ask this question and get information from the unconscious through quantum processes. So that's a technical way to deal with it, but you as a human being you don't need any technical equipment for this. This is mainly for professionals who do diagnosis and treatment for patients. It's a different way. All right. I think it's a good time to stop. And yeah, again, thank you very much. And what? Prasadam? Okay. Ishan, who's a very good cook, he actually prepared traditional Indian sweet called halava. Our Indian guests know it. It's very sweet and it's very nourishing. It's very good. So if you like something, you can just take from here. And all right. Thank you.
So I think we have to thank you a lot for the talk. Many exciting theses, I think. Many stuff to think about. I think many years of work in your life have developed this idea. We now get a glimpse of what it's all about in your perspective. So maybe I had a nice time sharing that with you. So you gave that idea to us. And thank you also for coming here. Yes, I had a great time. I hope you had it too.
Yes, I liked it. Thank you. Great. All right. Thank you.